All right, test check 1, 2. How's it sounding? Sounds pretty good. Let's get this thing going. There I am. Sweet. All right. Hello and welcome to yet another Ableton Office Hours stream. My name is Zaak Kerstetter. I'm an Ableton Certified Trainer, and here at Catalyze Academy, this is what we do on Monday afternoons. Basically, I'm gonna be hanging out and playing around with some music stuff, and you guys are more than welcome to come by and ask me questions about making music with Ableton Live, or anything you want, really. But I can only really promise that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to live. What's up, after party? How are you doing today? I was gone last week for vacation, and I apologize about that if any of you guys missed the streams. But now I'm back. Yeah, I had a fantastic vacation. I went down to Mexico for a few days with my wife, my new wife, and it was great to just kind of like hang out. We didn't really do anything except for chill by the beach and eat food, and that was perfect. So yeah, super fun. What's up, your name? How you doing today? But that was like that was like my big break for I start kind of like really hunkering down and start writing a bunch of new music. So super excited about that. This was very much kind of like a way to kind of punctuate the last 12 months that I've had. And now it's just gonna be writing lots of music, making a bunch of videos, doing more streaming, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, Mexico was great. The beach was great. She got stung by a stingray. That was not fun. But other than that, it was fantastic. So yeah, so today I did not really have anything planned. So if you guys have questions, things that you want to talk about, feel free to let me know in the chat. Otherwise, I will probably do a little bit of sound design. Yeah, username, absolutely. So we can talk a bit about compression. I definitely need to make some more mixing videos and just put them on the channel just so I have more mixing stuff on the channel. So yeah, let's talk about compression, because compression is one of those topics that is pretty difficult to actually understand. Conceptually, it's not that difficult to understand, but actually using it in real life is actually pretty difficult. Yeah, after party. Sometimes you think like making a really noisy track is going to be easier, but sometimes that makes it even harder to mix. All right, so let's start with like a drum beat here. Go in here, let's find something that has a little bit of dynamics to it. Actually, let's go to my sample library and let's grab a nice classic drum break. Take something like this. So when you're talking about compression, it's really important to understand dynamics and dynamic range. All right, so functionally, the way a lot of people use a compressor is just to make things louder. But if we were in a situation like this, where this is what our volumes are looking like. Number one, let's talk about dynamics. When you think dynamics, think volume, but not just the volumes, but the differences between volumes. So the quietest sound, at least that we can see right now, is probably this sound right here, one of those hi-hats. The loudest sound that we can see is going to be this guy or this guy right here, right? So the dynamic range of a clip or piece of music is going to be the differences between your quietest volumes and your loudest volumes. So essentially it's difference between the volume that you're getting right here and the volume you're getting right there, more or less. The difference in range between those is the dynamic range. So what a compressor does is it's going to limit your dynamic range, right? So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it so that the difference in loudness between this sound and this sound is less, but not just those two sounds, between all the sounds. But I'm using the quietest sounds and the loudest sound as an example. So functionally, the way that we're going to look at this is if I have a drum beat that looks like this, and I want to make this louder, say these hi-hats right here are too quiet, and I want to make them louder, I could go to my gain controller here, and I could turn it up, and that will make everything louder, right? However, once I do that, it starts clipping. You know, now this is clipping, and this is clipping, and this is clipping, and all the loud sounds are clipping. So if I want to essentially make these sounds louder, there's a limit to how much I can turn them up by, right? I can only turn these up so much. I can only go like a decibel or so before I start clipping. And we don't want to clip. So what we're going to do instead is we are going to compress these. And compressors are confusing because they are a little bit counterintuitive. In order to make things louder, we have to make things quieter first. So what a compressor is going to do is it's basically going to take your louder sounds, meaning this sound, this sound, this sound, whatever your louder sounds are, and turning them down first. And only turning down the loudest sounds. Then, now that our dynamic range is smaller, the difference between our loud sounds and our quieter sounds is less, we can now turn everything up at the same time. So if your loudest sound is here and your quietest sound's here, we take your loudest sounds, turn them down first. Now our dynamic range is this far instead of being this far. So our dynamic range is smaller, which now means we can turn everything up together at the same amount. Let's try this out. We're gonna test this out a little bit. So we're gonna start with a clip like this. And we're gonna toss a compressor on it. So I'm a little bit zoomed out. So let me zoom this bad boy back in here. Feels zoomed out, at least for how I normally stream. I'll do 140. All right, so here's our compressor. And if we're using the live compressor, there's 3 different views here. There's going to be this one, and this one. They are all the exact same thing. It's really up to you. I really like this one for learning about compression. This makes the most sense to me, but you can use any one of these 3 views and it works exactly the same way. So in this situation right here, let's just do this one actually. We're gonna jump back and forth between different views and see how they go. So in this view, if we hit play, you guys can hear that, right? Yeah, looks like it. In this view, we can see the gray line right here indicates the volume coming in. The blue line right here represents the threshold. The threshold is the volume with which your compressor turns on. So if you are not hitting that threshold, this compressor is not doing anything. Like this is going to sound exactly the same as this. It just doesn't change anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to start turning down our threshold, which we can do right here, or just by moving this blue line around, until our loudest sounds start to hit that threshold. Like that. And now you can see this yellow line right here represents our gain reduction. So that's how much volume is being turned down after you pass the threshold. So up here, nothing's being turned down. Let the margin turn this down here. And if I turn it down like this, it's really obvious, right? You can really hear that these sounds are being turned, or that these sounds are being turned down a lot. I see a lot of people do stuff like this when they're compressing and just over compress it and it sounds like garbage. So what you want to do is you want to set your threshold so that your loudest sounds are just hitting that a little bit. something like that. I would probably go a little bit less in a real world situation, but for the purpose of example, I'm gonna keep it around here. If we want to check out, well, actually, we'll check out that view in a minute. So we can see that's our gain reduction right there. On top of that, we have a couple of controls over here that are really important. We have, for example, the ratio. The ratio is going to be how much it's going to turn down after you pass the threshold. So the threshold is the volume that triggers the compressor. The ratio is going to be how much it turns down. So if you have a ratio of 1 to 1, it doesn't do anything. And then as you turn this up, let me turn it more. Let me turn this down a little bit more. So you can see that's really obvious there, where these are going to be a bit more subtle. So ratio is going to be the amount. If you would like a different way to look at it, this I think is a really fantastic way to get started with compression. On this diagram, we're going to have our incoming volume on our y-axis, our outgoing volume on our x-axis. And then we have this yellow dot, which represents our threshold. And then we're going to get a bouncing yellow dot to represent our volume. So in this situation, since we're not hitting our threshold, it's not doing anything. And then as I turn down the threshold, we can see our incoming volume and our outgoing volume are the same thing down here. But once it hits that threshold, it's going to be turned down a little bit. Also, in case people are just joining us, if you guys have any questions about music production or whatever, feel free to let me know in the chat. Right now, we're just talking a little bit about compressors. So once the volume hits the threshold, you can see instead of being a straight diagonal line like that, it curves off. And if you adjust the ratio, you can see the more that it curves off, the more it turns it down. Once again, a ratio of 1 to 1 does nothing. A ratio of 10 to 1 or higher is basically just a limiter. So with a limiter is just like a really harsh compressor, where it basically says that once you hit this threshold, you are not allowed to get any louder at all. Like that. Whereas generally 2 to 1 would be like a light amount of compression, 4 to 1 is like a medium amount of compression, 10 to 1 or higher is going to be like that, basically a limiter. It's going to be a lot of compression there. So threshold is when it turns on. Ratio is going to be how much it turns on. And then you have your gain reduction, which is going to tell you how much it's being turned down, which we can see right here. So what's up, Bishop? Yeah, compressors, like, I can explain compressors pretty quickly, but actually understanding like when and where and why and how to use them takes a really long time. Compressors are probably one of the most tricky things about all of music production. Cool. So in our example here, where we wanted to compress our drum beat, we wanted to limit our dynamic range. I'm going to turn the threshold down a decent amount. I don't know, something like that. We're getting a pretty decent amount of gain reduction there. So now that I've turned the loudest sounds down, we can then go to our makeup gain or our output gain, which is right here in this view and right here in this view. So now I've turned the loudest sounds down. I can turn everything back up by the same amount on the output gain. And in this situation, functionally what I've done is made it so that the loudest sounds are basically the same volume and the quieter sounds are louder. So we're limiting our dynamic range through using the compressor here by turning our loudest sounds down a little bit and then using the output gain to turn it back up. That's the basic concept. And there's a lot of different applications for this. There's a lot of different situations where you can use a compressor to do all kinds of different things with your dynamics. And there's a lot of really good ways to use them. There's a lot of bad ways to use them, and there's a lot of incorrect ways to use them that actually still sound good. There's a lot of nuance to using a compressor here. The other big thing you want to watch out for when it comes to using a compressor is the makeup gain button right here. If you're using Live 10, this is actually a really big change that they made. If you're using Live 10, the makeup gain by default is on. In Live 11, they turned it off. But the way the makeup gain button works is that instead of manually turning it up for yourself, it's going to automatically turn it back up for you. So check this out. If we turn our threshold all the way up, right now it's not doing anything because we're not hitting our threshold. But now as I turn the threshold down, it's going to automatically turn it back up for me, which means I don't need to use this output gain. So you can hear in this case, it's staying loud. Whereas if the makeup gain is turned off, it gets quieter. So sometimes you want to use the makeup gain because it's nice and easy and it just does it for you. Sometimes you want to manually adjust your output gain. You don't need to do both at the same time unless you want to. Like if I have makeup gain turned on, I don't really need to use this unless I really feel like it, or in a situation where I was really compressing it and now I'm clipping coming out of it. You could turn it down a little bit to kind of find that sweet spot where it sounds good. So that's kind of like the basics of compression. Threshold is what volume turns on. Ratio is how much it's going to turn it down by once you pass your threshold. Output gain or makeup gain, one of the two, whichever one you want, is totally up to you. And then you also have things like attack and release that are really important, especially for compressing drums. So it's going to be how long it takes for this gain reduction to turn down after you pass the threshold. So you can hear it's turning down really fast. Whereas here, you're not even getting as much gain reduction because it's so slow. And then release is how long it takes to reset back to 0 gain reduction. So in this case, it's going down fast and then back up slowly. So you can have very quick, very responsive gain reduction by keeping these small, or you can adjust these kind of to taste. You can also automatically set your release value here by hitting that button. But yeah, that's kind of the basic idea. Pretty much every compressor is going to be based off of just those concepts. So if we were to look at, for example, the glue compressor is all of the exact same features. They're just laid out in a slightly different way. So we have a threshold here. This is our gain reduction meter. So it's going to tell us how much gain is being reduced. We have our makeup gain right here. We have attack, we have release, we have ratio, which in this case can only be either 2, 4, or 10. But yeah, all the same basic ideas there. So once you kind of know what a compressor is and how it works, you can use pretty much any compressor. They all kind of do the same thing and behave the same way. It's just knowing when to overdo it and when to be subtle about your compression is really tricky, because if you go too crazy and you overcompress everything all the time, it sounds like shit, unless there are certain situations where you can overcompress things and still make them sound good. So, sometimes you want to be really subtle with your compression. Sometimes you want to be really over the top, but just be paying attention and don't go too over the top all the time. Because dynamics, that difference in volumes, that dynamic range, is really valuable in a lot of situations. Not everything needs to be really loud all the time. That's how we end up with the loudness war and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes you want things to punch, you want them to hit real hard, you want them to sound really like nice and crisp in your mix, and compressors can be a great way to achieve that kind of sound. But if you're overcompressing everything, then you have no dynamic range, and then it doesn't sound good at all. We could talk about dynamic range and loudness for a very long time if you want to. What's up, Nassim? How you doing? After party, we'll get to your question in just a moment. I just want to finish talking about compressors. So username is asking, would you advocate stacking compressors and or playing gain option? There's a wide dynamic range in a recording. That's a really great question. It really depends on the situation. If it's something like this where there is a bit of this is a pretty short clip, so there's a bit of dynamic range in a short amount of time. Compressors are really great for that because you just kind of squish them together and it makes it nice and easy. Whereas if I have like a vocal recording of somebody where they're like, during the verse, they're singing at one volume, and during the chorus, they're like a totally different volume, I might just automate that. But the nice thing about the compressors is you just slap it on there, get your settings where you want them to be, and then it's going to work great. All right. All right, make sure I'm keeping up with chat. All right, let me jump back up. So if there's any more questions about compressors, let me know. But I'm going to move on to some other questions in chat, and we might jump back to it just because compression is such a widely sought after topic. All right, so After Party was asking, when I grab audio MIDI, clip in the arrangement view, and try to drag it to a different section, it takes forever for the grid to move. I want to put the clip. After Party, I just usually use copy and paste as the fast way to move things around, especially using copy time and paste time. Those can be really helpful, or Command I for insert time if you need to like get extra space. But I know what you mean, where you're clicking and you're dragging and you're moving things around. Or just use the plus and minus buttons to zoom. So if I have a clip that is right here, I'm assuming is what you're asking. Like, if you've got to clip this right here and you move it over here, and you're like, okay, this takes forever just to move this over here. Copy and paste, or just use plus and minus key. So zoom out, move it over here, and then zoom in, or use the Z key to zoom in and out of things. That's probably what I'd recommend for moving things around. All right, and then Martin was asking, say you want to make, oh, thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate that username. So to make something like drum and bass or breakbeat where the majority of your percussion is from chopping samples, specifically samples that already include a kick. How do you give the kick enough room in the mix to be the backbone of the track? So I think that's also a really fantastic question. If you're going to be doing a bunch of chopping and slicing like that, I personally like to have my own dedicated kick, my own kind of like, because a lot of times if you're like sampling from a breakbeat, the kicks are not, they're these very acoustic sounding kicks, like even in an example like this. I love what's going on with the cymbals and the snare, but the kick does not have the power that I would need for like a drum and bass track. So I usually have a separate track just for my kick that's going to be the sample, my EDM sample or my kick drum sample. And then for the kicks that are actually in the breakbeat, EQ them out. Get rid of them. Unless I really like them, I'm most likely EQing them out of this situation, and that way I'm just getting my kick on its own separate track wherever I want, and then chopping up my breakbeat however I want, and then I don't need to worry about where the kick is. That's most likely how I would do it in that situation. If I really love the kick, I might just layer, like extract it, like find out where the kick is. Where's the kick? So say I liked, I don't know, we're gonna get just the kick. This guy right here, I might just take it, put it on its own separate track. I know, I think my camera is gonna be going away here, so give me 1 second to see if I can get that back online. I might just do a no camera stream. I apologize about that. But I need to figure out how to make chat bigger so I can see it from farther away. So I was saying about this guy here. So use that and then copy and paste this around, layer it with my more kind of EDM sample, and then chop everything else up separately. But a lot of times, like this, it's cool, but it lacks the power for something I need in like a drum and bass track or breakbeat or something like that. Nassim, we'll get to your question in just a moment. Yeah, so in something like this username, where we have this as our breakbeat, I don't necessarily want that kick in there, so I'll probably just EQ8, get rid of that. Do something like that, so that way I don't really get the kick, but I still get the snare, and I still get all the samples, or the cymbals, or whatever I want. And I still slice these up however I want, and then I have my own dedicated kick track separately. Yeah, slicing to Midi is a pretty good option. That way you can just layer it in a drum rack and just replay it that way. That could also work. Even if you do that, you're still going to want to EQ out that kick, most likely, and then use your own kick. But a lot of times for slicing stuff like this, I'll just do it in the arrangement view. So like say I want to take this guy, I'll just like duplicate that around, or I'll take this one and I'll reverse it, and then I'll like add a bunch right here. And that's a really fun way to kind of do little breakbeat edits and things like that. Just kind of everything's already on the grid here, so I can like take this, maybe move that over here, maybe take this one, option drag, same thing as copying and pasting, maybe move this over here. And start to do little breakbeat edits that way, or get rid of something. I don't know. There's fun stuff you can do in here that I find is really fast and easy, as opposed to just putting that inside a drum rack and creating something that way. Yeah, username pretty much exactly. So have my own kick that I love that's a nice big huge kick, and then don't worry about the kick that's in the breakbeat. I think is a nice way to kind of like get the best of both worlds. Okay, so Nassim is asking, does compression need EQ before or after? Also wanted to ask if compression was a better option on an auxiliary track, especially for drums. So to answer your second question first, when you have a compressor on an auxiliary track, it's going to be called parallel compression. That's what parallel compression is. And that is a fantastic way to make your drums sound absolutely massive. So what we do in this situation is not have a compressor on, I mean, you might have a little bit of compression on the actual track itself, and then just a compressor. Let's use the glue compressor over here. On your return track, turn this down, turn this up a bit, and that way, as we're doing this, we turn this up to auxiliary return track C. That way here, we have the compressed signal, which we need. And then here we have our dry signal, and we kind of can mix and match between the two together here to get the right amount of compressed signal versus compressed signal. And that is a very powerful technique that I don't always do, but it works pretty well. So after party, it is different from just using the dry wet, because when you are using like a dry wet here, let's just use this guy. When you're using the dry wet here, you essentially have, I've talked about this before with auxiliary tracks. You can't see me right now. But when you are just getting the wet signal, you don't get any of the dry signal. So here, you're getting some wet and some dry, whereas here you're getting nothing, right? Whereas when you have your send knob that you can adjust, of course it's hard to see because I put chat right next to you. Also, you guys can let me know, where should chat live? Should I put you guys over here in my browser? I don't know. I'm confused about where I should put you guys. But right now, you're in the way of what I'm talking about with return tracks. That's hard to read over there. I'm not sure where you guys are going to live. I'm just going to put you down here. Hopefully that doesn't get in the way. Maybe it'll make you smaller. So yeah, so when you are using the send knob, the dry signal always stays exactly the same. You're always getting 100% dry signal. Whereas this controls the amount of wet signal. Whereas using the compressor actually on the track itself, as the wet signal goes down, the dry signal goes up, and as the dry signal goes down, the wet signal goes up. So they're moving up and down independent based off of each other here. Whereas when you're using parallel compression, you get the original signal and then you get the compressed signal, and you can control the amount of both of them individually. Yeah, I'm playing around with what I want to do with the chat. Maybe I'll just hide it for right now, and then we'll come back to having chat at some point in there, maybe. All right. Bishop Martin, thank you for the super chat. I super appreciate it. I haven't done a lot of breakbeat stuff at all recently, but I definitely like grew up listening to breakbeats and breakcore and all that kind of stuff. So maybe I'll have to make a breakbeat track, and then I'll see what I come up with as part of that process. But Nassim, jumping back to your first question about EQs, then compressors, this is an age-old argument, and I've talked to different people who come on different sides of it. Whether you want to have your compressor first and then your EQ, or your EQ first and then your compressor. Generally, what I'm doing with my EQ is I'm doing subtractive EQing. So I'm turning things down here, and then I'm going to be essentially turning things back up with the compressor. If I do it the other direction, I'm turning things up first with the compressor and then turning things down with the EQ. Sometimes it makes a difference between the two. Sometimes it doesn't really make any difference at all. It's really kind of depends on the situation. But I've talked to people who have used both, and I think generally I like EQ first and then compression, but I'm not sure if I can quantify exactly why. I think just to me, my brain, that makes more sense and it works better for me. So username is asking, I've been thinking about concept be recently EQing drum breaks and replacing low end with kick samples. Have you ever tried to emulate the analog circuit modeling concept Roland employs in the TR8? So I don't know which analog circuit modeling that they are trying to emulate. So I'd have to look into that a little bit and kind of see what they're trying to do there, because there's a lot of different kinds of like analog modeling things out there that are different depending on what you're trying to do. I think if you are looking to do analog modeling, one of the easiest places to do that in live is going to be inside pretty much any filter, but for example, like the auto filter. These different modes right here are different analog models. So these are designed to sound like the filters in specific pieces of hardware. And so like the MS2 is based off the MS20. One of these is a Moog filter. I forget which one. So you can like pick this analog modeling and then turn up the drive, and it will sound louder and more distorted, and also try to give it that kind of like analog emulation. I'm a big fan of the MS20 one. And you can notice it more, obviously, if you crank up the drive, but also if you turn up the resonance a little bit. Like that'll sound different than this. So you can try out these different analog modelings, and you can even see the PRD. The shape of the resonance is different between that versus that. It doesn't necessarily need to be auto filter. Most of the filters in live do this now. I guess auto filter would be the easiest way to do it. Yeah. But if you were to like open up Wavetable, for example, they have the same options in here. So they've added to, like I said, most of the filters. You could also do it in something like Sampler. So if you go to the filter in Sampler, that's all right here. So you load a kick drum into Sampler or Sampler, either one. Go to the filter settings, and then boom, they're all right there. So that would be the easiest way to do it. If you're trying to get that kind of like analog sound, try that and see how you like it. It just adds like a little bit of kind of like grit and distortion to it, which is really nice. All right, give me 1 second. I'm going to see if I can fix the camera situation and get the camera back on. All right, let's see if this works. All right, cool. So yeah, so there's a bunch of different ways that you could try to kind of like give it that kind of like analog sound. You could also try saturator, just toss a saturator on something. But that's usually when people are going for either the analog sound or an analog modeled sound. A lot of times the benefit of analog gear is that the circuitry inside that gear is not perfect, right? Somebody made that. And so those imperfections make it not always super consistent, which makes it sound really unique and has a lot of character to it, right? And in a lot of digital audio, everything's perfect, right? You set your filter to be, exactly 10,000 hertz. It's going to be exactly at 10,000 hertz. There's no like amount of error in that. So there are ways to create that level of error to like purposely make things sound a little bit off. they can be really cool that make it sound more analog. So for example, you could take this LFO and give like the tiniest bit of LFO modulation to the pitch of your kick drum. Not enough for it really to be noticeable, but just a hair will give it that little bit of imperfection. And in fact, if you take a look at something like analog, which is designed to sound very analog, if you go to the global section here, if I'm not mistaken, there's this error percentage control right here. So if you turn this up, it's going to add a little bit of randomness to your sound. I think it changes the pitch a tiny bit, and I forget what else it changes, to make it sound more like an analog synthesizer where every single note is not exactly perfect, but that's partially what makes it sound good. It makes it sound more organic. Anything else that changes? Yeah, it changes the tuning. So like you can purposely add in like this I say random, I guess it is randomness to the tuning to make it sound more like an analog synthesizer. But that's usually what people are talking about when they're talking about like analog modeling. It's like it's either a very specific shape or of a filter or something like that. It's very specific kind of distortion, or in some cases it's just like those little bits of imperfection that add that little extra special sauce to a sound. Cool. Hopefully that answers your question. I think I'm all caught to all the questions in chat. Let me know if there's anything I missed or forgot. Yeah, username, a couple ways I would go about doing that if you didn't want every single kick to be exactly the same and you wanted it to sound more like a real drummer. Let's just grab a kick sample. Cool, that'll work. Number one, make it velocity sensitive. So if we go into like one-shot mode here, like the velocity to volume, and then as you're writing your Midi, you can plug in your Midi notes here. Either change the velocity manually or record yourself playing it so it's not all the exact same velocity, and then make sure that velocity can actually affect it. Give it velocity range. This is a fantastic tool to add more humanness to your drums, because that way not only can we control the velocity itself, but we can also control the range of the velocity in either direction. So each time it plays, it will not always be the exact same velocity. And velocity, I think, is really, really crucial in making things sound more human. If something is the exact same velocity every single time, you can tell it's just it feels a little soulless. So using velocity on volume, and then also setting up velocity sensitivity to control other things, which if you are using sampler, you can do in the Midi page here. So in sampler, you could take the velocity, which is obviously controlling volume, but also have it control other things. So maybe velocity controls pitch just a tiny bit. Not a lot, but just a tiny bit. Or it controls the filter settings, filter frequency. Yeah, not a lot, but just a tiny bit. Could be really cool. And that way, as you're either playing it with your Midi controller or you are adjusting things, or just randomizing your velocity, or giving yourself velocity ranges, the velocity does more, right? If you are not using sampler and you're using simpler, let me get back in here, you can use the expression control Max for Live device, which has a velocity input. So we can take velocity and map it to anything we want. So in this situation, I'd probably go in here. Say we want to do, again, velocity to filter frequency. Map this here. and we'll change the minimum and maximum range so it's not like way down there. So now, as I'm playing it at different velocities, again, we're not only getting different volumes, we're also getting different filter settings, which is like a nice kind of subtle thing we can do. We can also make this one velocity and map it to like the detune and sense, and maybe not go a huge amount. Actually, let's see how far see what that sounds like. Like that. I don't know. There's a bunch of different ways you can play around with it, but those are just some ideas off the top of my head for making your kick drum in your breakbeat feel like it has a little bit more life and humanness going on. What's up, Jeff? How are you doing today? That's a really good question. So Jeanette was asking, speaking of randomization, when playing chords, how do I humanize chords to sound more human, like without manually editing them? Is there an easy way? I know, but for a fact, there's a Max for Live device that allows you to do like almost like a strumming effect, but I don't remember what it's called, and I have not tried it out for myself. So I would have to look into it and see if I can find it. You could also just look up Max for Live strumming device, and that would be a good place to get started. I'm assuming you want so you're playing a chord, and instead of just playing all your notes at the same time, you play one and then the other ones are off a tiny bit. Let's get creative about this because I got an idea. I think this could be cool. What's up, Kennedy? How you doing today? All right, so say we got something like this, and I want to be able to play a chord and have it change the timings. I feel like now then my idea maybe it won't work there. Yeah, what's gonna be the easy solution here to do this? I think Max for Live, there's a Strum Max for Live device that'll just do it for you. But I want to get creative about it and see if there's a way to just do it without Max for Live. Like a note. I mean, we could try the note echo. I don't think is what we want, because that's going to be more like a actual delay itself. Although it's trying to feedback down. Okay. So this will, yeah, I mean, I think the real solution here, I mean, after party has a good point. The real idea here is like just play with the MIDI controller. So let's turn this off. And like just play it with the MIDI controller. That would be the real way to add that humanness to it. But if you had already recorded a chord progression and you wanted them to be kind of strummed, so the note echo will delay your MIDI notes by an amount of time you set here in milliseconds if you switch the input to mute and the feedback to 0. So now every note I'm playing is being delayed by 50 milliseconds, which is fine. But what I want is so that some of the notes have this and some of them don't, right? So what I'm thinking here is we put this in a rack, and I'm just making this up as I go. So I'm not entirely sure if this is going to work or not. And so I want this to go through, I want to be able to randomize this on the fly. What's going to be the easiest way to do that? Yeah, no, this might be too complicated. This might not work. Let me look some up real quick. Yeah, this is probably the Max Fly device that I would check out. It's $10, but I think it's going to do exactly what you want. Yeah, I would try that and see how it goes. I will also try this one out and let you know how it goes. So Nassim was asking, can I ask for advice about synthesizers? I'm planning on investing my first one during Black Friday. Trade Pigments 3 seems to be a good option. What about Serum and Vital? Vital is free, isn't it? Maybe there's like an upgraded version. Am I just totally mistaken at that? The basic version's free. I mean, I think that the try the free version of Vital, see if you like it. There's a subscriber version, and there's a bunch of other shenanigan stuff, but the base synthesizer itself, you just get more presets as you pay for more money, it looks like. So Vital just grab anyway. Between Pigments and Serum, that's a fantastic question. I don't own Pigments. However, everybody I know who does own Pigments loves it. So I might actually just grab Pigments. How much is that going for? It's on sale for $99. That's pretty good. So Serum, I think, is really cool. It's really hard to argue with Serum because it's such a really good, really well designed, versatile synthesizer. However, my big issue with Serum, and this is very much like a first world problem, is that everybody uses Serum. And different synthesizers have like a different like quality to them. They have different like tonal quality to them. They have like certain sounds that they make. And so because everybody is using Serum and has been using Serum for several years now, you just get a lot of the same sounds out of it. So if it were me, it also depends a little bit on what kind of music you're making. If you're making like really heavy dubstep kind of stuff, or just really just bass heavy music, I'd probably go with Serum. If that's not your main focus, probably Pigments. I do feel like it's about time that there's probably something that will replace Serum at some point as kind of the main synthesizer for sound design. But yeah, I love Serum, but it's just really, really popular, and therefore a lot of the sounds that come out of Serum end up sounding kind of similar, kind of the same. But grab the free version of Vital, see if you like it. In fact, I would probably in either situation, download the demo version because they both have free demos. And then kind of see how you feel about it. Yeah, Silent is dope. I think it's really useful to like pick one synthesizer and learn it inside and out. The other thing that you could do is you could buy pigments while it's on sale and then do the rent to own thing with Serum, and you rent it for like $10 a month until you own it. And that's like a cheap way to get it. And if you don't like it, just stop renting it. And then it's not a huge investment. Yeah, Faceplant's pretty cool. It's not a bad one to have. If you guys are not using Plugin Boutique, let me give them a little shout out, especially for Black Friday. So if you guys are interested in acquiring plugins, Plugin Boutique has all the plugins, obviously, and they oftentimes run sales, and occasionally they run like ridiculous, like 93% off sales. And so I'm assuming during Black Friday they'll be doing stuff like that, or Cyber Monday or whatever it is. And if you are looking to get new plugins and you're not in a hurry, just kind of keep an eye at whatever Plugin Boutique is doing, and just look for the huge sales, and then buy it only when it's like, okay, 95% off on iZotope stuff. Like 70% off on Sound Toys. Fantastic. Do it. But yeah, I know I have a number of people in my life who just own a million plugins, and they spent barely any money on it because they just keep an eye on Plugin Boutique, and whatever is like, oh, if it's 95% off, I'm just gonna buy it and spend $5 on a $100 synthesizer. So this is a good place if you're in the market for things and trying to grab stuff. You would buy the plugins because you want to support the companies that are making products that you like. That would be the main reason. On top of that, eventually when your cracked plugins get outdated and you need to update them, can be a massive pain in the ass. Those would be the two main reasons you buy plugins. I don't really buy plugins a whole lot these days just because I just don't need them. I just use everything in the box for the most part. But yeah, I think that, you know, everybody at some point has probably cracked plugins. Yeah. And I think that's a good place. If you're getting started, that's fine. But I think that as you are developing your music career and you are kind of moving towards being more of a professional, I think it's a worthwhile cause to any plugins that you use, replace them with the legit versions. Support the companies you like that are actually doing stuff, and that way they continue making new products that you like. What's up, Morgan? How you doing? Yeah, Plugin Boutique is dope. Said I haven't bought stuff recently, but get on their mailing list, and occasionally they'll be like, here's a huge discount. Especially on Black Friday. So this upcoming week, keep an eye on what they're doing because that's a good way to grab stuff. Sweet. So if you guys are looking for plugin recommendations besides the ones that were mentioned by Nassim, I think, grab the Valhalla plugins because they're super worthwhile having. And FabFilter. Those are kind of the two plugin companies that I will always support. Yeah, username. I don't know how often that actually happens in real life, but it definitely does happen, and it's definitely embarrassing if that happens to you. All right. There's a bunch of new people join us, so if you guys are just popping in here, feel free to ask any questions you might have about making music with Ableton Live, and I will try my best to try to answer them. Yeah, after party, that's another good point. Viruses as well. Like if you're getting cracked stuff, you never know what somebody's putting in there. And also, you really need to watch out if like there's a new operating system that your computer gets updated to, and all your old stuff doesn't work anymore. Then you gotta like re-download all of the cracked versions, and it's just a pain in the ass, really, more than anything else. So Jeff is asking a question about 808s. How do I make those slides similar to drill type beats? That is also a great question. Let's try it out. There's a number of ways to do it, realistically. All right, so say we have, that's the wrong track. So say we got an 808 kind of like this guy. And we want it to slide. For me, probably the easiest way to do that is going to be creating some kind of glide. And in something like simpler, which is most likely where my 808 is going to live, is right here. So we have two options, portamento and glide. So if we turn the glide on, now as I change notes, it's going to glide between them. And if I give them a really long glide, let's try portamento and see if that, it's going to glide between them. In either one of these situations, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the difference between the portamento and glide is monophonic and portamento is polyphonic. In this situation, I don't think it matters. But if you hold down one note, you hold down one note, play the note, and then it'll glide between them. And the amount of time here is going to be how long it glides between them. So that's a really, probably the easiest way to do that, is just find the glide settings and then adjust it like that. Another way to do it would be if you were working with audio. So say I've just got a couple of these kicks in here. You could just transpose them. Oh, you could also do it, I forgot one more time over on the Midi side of things. If we have, what's going on here? Why does that second one sound weird? Oh, it's because the velocity thing I think I did earlier. So I delete all these guys and just do it again. The other way to do it in Midi is going to be go to the Midi control, and there's the pitch bend. So you can do pitch bends. Why am I clipping so much? So you can glide it however you want, just by going in your envelopes to Midi control, and then pitch bend is going to be the first option, and then pitching it up, pitching it down, go whichever direction you want. That'd be the other way to do it with Midi. If you're working with audio and you have something like this, you could do a similar thing where you automate the transposition. The problem with this one is it actually still works pretty well. So that's how I would start, depending on what's your method of loading up your kicks is. If you're doing with audio, just go to clip, go to transposition, pitch it up, pitch it down, whatever direction you want to go. If you're working with Midi, either do it with the pitch bending control or do it with the glide control. Either one will work, depending on kind of your workflow and what you think makes it work. Jeff, does that make sense? Hopefully. Those are 3 of many options for doing 808 glide kind of things. Get rid of this guy. Sweet. Anybody else have any questions, things they want to talk about? I appreciate all the questions people had so far. You got some really good ones today. I don't think there's any other way I would like do glides with 808s that would be really simple. Those are the 3 techniques off the top of my head that I think make the most sense. Sweet. Well, appreciate everybody coming by today. Now that I'm back from vacation and there's a little more people here, the stream schedule is going back to normal. So tomorrow I'm going to be doing another Patreon only live stream. If you want to get in on that, you can hit up the Patreon over at the Patreon page that's linked below. I'll be doing like a production stream where I'll be making a track from scratch. And then back to normal Wednesdays for song feedback streams. So if you got some tracks you want to share, there's going to be on Wednesday. That's going to be on Wednesday, obviously same time as right now. But yeah, so anybody questions, things they want to talk about related to music production or otherwise, I guess? And so, Jen, if you were interested in the note expression tool when dealing with Midi, which note expression tool are you talking about? You're not talking about you're not talking about the expression control, are you? Are you talking about MPE? I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you talking about MPE? Okay. So MPE, which is what this whole page is about, is a little bit confusing because you don't need, but it helps to have an MPE controller. So something like the Rolly block, which is this little guy right here. So MPE, which stands for Midi Polyphonic Expression, is essentially a newer version of Midi that contains all of the same things that old Midi had, but with 3 extra parameters, which are polyphonic pitch bend, a slide control, and a pressure control. So in order to make that work, let me get rid of this grand piano and use wavetable. We need a MIDI controller that sends MPE and a synthesizer that receives MPE. As far as I'm aware, the only synthesizers in live that send and receive MPE off the top of my head are wavetable and I think sampler. I don't think any of the other ones do yet. So on wavetable, you notice there's this MPE section over here where we have inputs for velocity, polyphonic pitch bend, pressure, or slide and pressure. So this is why it's confusing, because even if you're using an MPE controller, you also need a device that can receive MPE. So say I've got a clip here with a note. Yeah, so you can play around with MPE without an MPE controller, but it's not as fun, in my opinion. It's not as interesting. So here's my beautiful note progression that we just made. So if I go into the note expression, you'll notice that I have a slide control here and a pressure control for each one of these. So for example, something like this, I can plug in automation. The cool thing here is that all of the automation is on a per note basis, as opposed to regular MIDI, which is not. So I can have automation here where this note has its own set of automation for slide, and then this note has its own set of automation for slide. So that's kind of cool that I can do that manually. However, right now, when I play these notes, it doesn't do anything. So I need to assign slide to something. So I could assign it to like oscillator 1 position. So I can use this to automate things, essentially like I could with regular MPE, except for it is on a per note basis. The same thing is true for pressure. So I could plug in MPE pressure for each one of these notes, and that could have its own set of things. So if I go back in here, I can assign pressure to something like filter frequency. So you can manually do that. There's also a per note pitch bend. So if I go in here, you can see this has its own pitch bend. So I can pitch that up here. This one has its own pitch bend here, and they can be separate, and they're on, again, per note basis. So if I want this to work, I have to assign pitch bend to pitch, otherwise it doesn't work at all. And now, as I play these notes, so you can still use MPE, but it's a pain because you have to manually use each one individually, and you have to map each one individually, and it's not as cool. Whereas if you have a MPE controller, you just play stuff, and it automatically records pitch bend, slide, and pressure all at the same time for you, and gives you automation lanes for all three of them independently for every single note, which is kind of cool. I have an MPE controller. I have that Rolly block, and I barely ever use it because it's kind of a pain. So I'm hoping as time goes on and MPE becomes more common, well, this will be easier to use and more useful. But right now you need a synthesizer that can respond to MPE. You can plug in that MPE data manually, but it's not super fun to do because it just isn't that interesting as opposed to just regular automation. But yeah, that's kind of the basics of MPE and how it works, at least in live. So you don't need a controller to use it, but it definitely helps. So username was asking, what would you say is a preferable dynamic range to be aiming for after the gain automation before entering compression, so the compressors aren't having to work too hard? That is very much up to both the content that you are working with, as well as your own personal preference and the genre you're trying to go for. So Yeah, I think it really depends a little bit on kind of your compressor and what you're trying to do with it. I think in a lot of situations, if I just again have like this little breakbeat kind of thing, I'm not too worried about the compressor having to do too much work. Mostly you're going to try to like stick your compressor on here, just turn it down a little bit. So I'm just getting a little bit of gain reduction there. I'm like not trying to do anything too crazy there. So I'm not worried about the dynamic range before it goes into compressor. I'll probably do my compression first. And then after I do that, if I need to do automation on the volume, I'll do automation on the volume. I'm not doing automation on the volume first and then running into the compressor. That makes sense in terms of workflow. What's up, Brian? How you doing? New MacBook Pro or new MacBook Pro iPhone on Wednesday. Expect a CPU overload. Can you recommend USB hub compatible? I can recommend the USB hub that I use, which is one of the Anker ones. I think just ANKER is how you spell the brand. I've had it for a while and it works really well, and I think they make pretty good stuff. I'm not sure if I'm assuming that their new products are as good as the ones that I've been using, but that's what I've used and that's what works for me. I honestly, since I bought it, have not really looked into USB hubs and what if there's anybody who's doing a especially good job. My thoughts with USB hubs are it works and it's fast and it has enough ports. That's all you really need. Yeah, Anchor seems to work for me. Did you get one of the new M1Xs or whatever, the new MacBook Pros? Because they look very nice, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to get a new laptop yet. Yeah, that's a good point. Get a USB hub that has a power support from the wall. Makes a big difference. Yeah, USB. I think that when you're recording, whether it's guitar or vocals or anything like that, if there is a lot of dynamic range, it can definitely be a lot more of a pain to deal with. So if you're recording yourself playing bass and guitar, just make sure that you don't just like some of your notes aren't super loud and some aren't super quiet. Like try to keep it in kind of a medium range, and that'll give you it'd be a lot easier to work with on the post-production kind of stuff. Um, yeah, the big thing about recording audio is adjusting the gain knob on your interface or whatever you're running through to make it so that you get like a nice consistent volume. I've been working with a few artists who are doing different kinds of like live looping setups, and gain staging is really, really crucial because if you are recording things, especially if you're looping and things like that, it can sound good when you're like on stage and performing, but when then you actually get that audio file and are working with that, it can be too quiet, and that's such a pain to deal with. So just make sure you're gain staging properly for your audio coming in, and then that way your compressor has to do less work afterwards. Nice, Brian. Let me know how that goes. I'm curious to see how live responds to the new M1s. All right, so Jeff has a drum rack problem. If I program my drums in a drum rack, I want to extract chains at once, but I have not got the option yet. The other problem, if they have deafness, they turn back on when I'm missing. Interesting. I don't know if I've ever tried to extract chains from a drum rack with deactivated notes. Let's test this out. So we got our drum rack here. Let's just do this. And here we have deactivate every other one. So this one, if we extract chains, and go in here, interesting, they do reactivate. That is a fascinating interaction there. I mean, I think so. All right, let's undo that. I think in that situation, if that's what you're running into, where you're extracting this chain here, and then it's reactivating all of the notes, I would just go in and just delete them. Just click on them, hit delete on all of those, and then you extract and you should be good to go. Yeah, and there's no option for extracting all of them at once. You have to do them individually. As far as I'm aware, I don't think I've encountered a way to extract multiple, actually. Yeah, because if you try to do multiple ones at the same time, it puts them in the same drum rack. Which again, as far as I know, there's no other way to do it. You have to do them one at a time. Unless I am missing something. But I think I would have found that. If that was an option, I would have found it by now, I think. So yeah, so you have to do them one at a time. And I did not realize before this conversation that if you had deactivated notes, they reactivate. So I would just go into the deactivated notes and then delete them first, then extract them. But you do have to do them one at a time. There's no way around that I'm aware of. Which is unfortunate. That's why a lot of the time when I am building my drum racks or I'm building my kind of drums for a project, I'll have like my main drum rack, which will be my kick, snare, hi-hat, or like my kick, clap, hi-hat, or my basic like 3 to 4 or 5 main sounds. And then all of my percussion, all of my like cymbals and shakers and all that other kind of stuff gets its own drum rack, and they all stay in that drum rack. That way, when I'm extracting my chains, I don't need to extract 30 different sounds one at a time. I just extract my 5 major sounds into their own tracks, and then I have my other drum rack that has, again, all of my other percussive kind of sounds in there. And then they all stay in that drum rack. They never need to be extracted because they all live in the same place. They get EQ'd the same. They get compressed. They all get compressed the same. All that kind of stuff. Yeah, Kennedy, if you've only recently got into the drum racks are, I think, are one of the best devices in all of live. Like I don't think I will ever be able to use any other DAW because of how important drum racks are to my workflow. Like it's one place where you can just get all your ideas started and then put them on their own tracks and just makes them super flexible. All right, so Janeff's other problem is if you extract a chain, they become one-shots. can I turn the samples to be pitchable? I'm not sure if I understand the question, Janef. So you extract your chain here. And then now as you play, it's just that one note here. And then now you want to be able to play it where you can pitch it up and down. That's what it sounds like. There's a couple ways to approach that, because right now none of the other notes. Let's not do that. I'm not sure why that happened. So playing that one note is that sound there, but none of the others do anything. So if that's the situation you're in, you could take this, as long as you don't have anything else important in the drum rack. If you hit Shift Command G, is that not going to work here? I don't know why my key command didn't work, but Shift Command G should take it out of the drum rack. If that doesn't work, you can do what I did here, which is right click on it and hit Ungroup. That gets rid of the drum rack. So now this is pitchable. Like that. So that would be the other way. That would be the way to make it pitchable. The other option would be to go to the controls page and then just transpose it. It's still only being triggered by that one Midi note. But you can still transpose it there. But it sounds like what you want to go for is be able to play it in different pitches, which would be just, let's try our key command again. There you go. Shift Command G gets rid of the drum rack, and now it's just a simpler instrument living on a Midi track, which means I can just play different notes and then pitch up and down, and that works pretty well. Does that help? Does that kind of answer your question? You guys are bringing some like really good, really interesting questions today. There's a few questions that I was like, I'm not, let's see. So yeah, so Janef, if you have something that's in a particular key, so say you have a clip that's in like, I don't know, C major, and you pitch it down a semitone, it's gonna move you down to B. Because it's gonna take all of the notes and move it down by one semitone. If that makes sense. But yeah, drum racks are the best. Drum racks, you can just do everything all in one place, and they're really, really handy. Anybody else have any questions, things they want to get into today? I appreciate all the questions people have had so far, and all the super chats from those who gave them. If you are enjoying this stream, feel free to hit the like button, or go and comment on all of my videos or whatever. I greatly appreciate all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to figure out how to best grow the channel, and it's always a struggle fighting the YouTube algorithm. But I appreciate all the support that the channel has been getting recently. It's been really cool to kind of see the whole community grow over time. But I did not realize that when you extract your chains, if you have deactivated notes, they don't go with it, or it reactivates them. That's very strange to me. I feel like that shouldn't be the behavior. Yeah, it reactivates all the notes. That seems like a bug. Yeah, Kennedy, it's really kind of too bad. I feel like YouTube really started off as this place where independent creators could just make stuff and share stuff, and that was fine. And now it seems like everything that gets pushed on YouTube is very corporate. It's like big production companies with lots of money are pushing like TV, like, you know, it used to be that TV stations or TV shows didn't have their own YouTube channel, and now it just feels like that's what gets really pushed by YouTube a lot, is people who already have a pretty wide reach as a way to just increase their reach even more. But you know, what are you gonna do about it? Cool. Well, I have very much been enjoying fielding the questions you guys have had so far. I'm gonna hang out for a bit longer and see if there's any other questions, but I think we're gonna start winding things down a little bit. I appreciate all you guys have been putting forth in the chat. I still want to figure out if I want to keep the chat, like if I want to have it exist on screen. I know for you guys, you can already just see the chat on the side, but I'm wondering if that's like useful or helpful for people to have around. We'll see if where I put the chat, or if it ends up staying there, or what I end up doing with it. Emo, we were talking a little bit about plugins earlier. I have been abstaining from Black Friday and all that stuff. I think it's just I don't know, the whole thing feels like weirdly like consumerist and strange to me. But I'll see if there's anything cool out there. I haven't treated myself to any plugins in a while, so it might be time to see if I can, if there's something on sale, I might take a look at it. We were talking about pigments earlier, which I've been procrastinating on buying for a really long time. So pigments might be what I go for, but I'll see what else is out there that seems cool. All right, so username wants to talk a little bit about the groove feature, and I absolutely love the groove feature. I think it's really, really cool, but you have to know how it works. Once you know kind of the basics of what the groove feature is and what it's doing, it becomes a lot easier to actually integrate into your workflow. So let's try this out real quick. Let's start with the drum rack, and let's just do some hi-hats. All right, so let's do some like eighth note hi-hats. So say we got this going on. Just really, really quantized eighth note hi-hats. Doesn't really have a lot going on here. It's a little stiff, it's a little boring. So if I want to add some groove, the fastest way to get to it is either hit the groove button here, or oftentimes I just like to hit the little groove hotspot button here. That also takes you to it. We can definitely talk about polyrhythms too, kind of maybe right after grooves. Groove might be a good lead into polyrhythms actually. Jeff, I'll show you how I'll show you how I kind of figure out what kind of groove I like in just a moment, once we understand the basics of it. So in your grooves folder, there's going to be a bunch of grooves. Some of them are ones you may have added yourself. There's lots of different stuff in here. But let's talk about swing. I think swing is the best way to learn about groove. So swing is a specific kind of groove. And so say, let's go to the 8th note swings right here. So the first number you're going to see in this case is 8th notes or 16th notes or 32nd notes. So that's obviously the timing of the groove. The second number, at least when we're talking about swing, is going to be the amount. And it's kind of weird because 50% is essentially nothing. And 75% is a huge amount of groove. So a lot of these, depending on if you're using Live 10 or 11, will go from 50 to 75. In this case, it goes 52, 54, 57, 59. I don't know why they picked these numbers. They just did. Up to 73 in this case. We're talking about these 8th note swings. So if I grab, for example, a medium swing, like a 64, which is actually pretty heavy, like that. The way the swing works, or the way groove works in general, is that it's going to quantize your clip to a grid that is not the actual grid. A swing specifically means that every other note will be late. So if I have an 8th note swing, that means that this note will be on time, this note will be late. This note will be on time, this will be late, this will be on time, this will be late, this will be on time, this will be late. So if I want to try this 64% swing, I can double click on it, I can click and drag it onto the clip, or I can click and drag down here. So now I've got a 64% 8th note swing. And if I listen to it, you can hear it, as opposed to this, right? But I can't see it. So if I want to actually see this, if I want to see what this looks like in here, if I hit this little arrow button, we can see that, as I predicted, this is on time, this one's late, this one's on time, this one's late, etc. The reason 50% is nothing and 75% is a lot is that when we're talking about percentage, it's the space between here and here. So a 50% 8th note swing is exactly this. It does nothing. Whereas a 75 would mean that this note will start 75% between the start of this note and the start of this note. So a 75% swing will look like that, essentially, for every one of these notes. So that's a 75% swing. So let's try a different one. Let's try like a 57. So go in here, pick 57. If I listen to it, you can hear it's doing something. If I want to see what it's doing, you hit the commit button. Once you hit the commit button, it removes the swing from here because it writes it into the MIDI file. So we can see that these notes are now starting 57% of the way between the start of this note and the start of this note. So that's how swing is working. So essentially we are quantizing to a grid that's not the actual grid itself, if that makes sense. We do have a bunch of other controls in here for controlling things like the quantization, timing percentage, which is basically like a dry wet control. We can randomize things. We can make the velocity different. Some of these grooves have velocity involved. Some of them don't, or some of them are very subtle. So if I, for example, let's go back to the 64th note groove. I turn the velocity up to 100%, and then I hit commit. In this case, it didn't do anything because this one does not include any velocity changes, but some of them will. So essentially we are doing the opposite of quantizing. We're moving things off that were start on the grid, and we're moving them off of the grid to make them sound more human, which is super, super important in my opinion if you're making music that you want people to dance to. So kind of going to Janeff's question about how do you find the right amount of groove? My favorite technique for doing this is you want to start with the groove that's way too over the top. So for example, we're going to start with the 73% groove. And we're going to just add it down here. Here's our 73% groove. It's too much. So, but if I want to find that nice kind of sweet spot where it's nice and like subtle and it's working for me, this timing control right here, and if you can hit this button to show and hide your groove pool, you can also drag grooves directly into your groove pool. If it's in your groove pool, it'll be added to the drop-down menu down here. So the timing percentage is basically like a dry wet. So at 100%, it's doing this, in this case, full 73% groove. But as I start to turn this down, it's going to turn it down to essentially down to 50%. So if you start with a really heavy groove, you can just start turning down the timing until you find that sweet spot where it sounds really good. So we'll try this out. Here, it's going to sound like nothing. As I turn this up, you can start to hear it being more obvious. If I keep turning this up even more, this is up all the way. So we just heard all of the different timings, but from 50%, in this case, up to 73%. So this is oftentimes how I'll try to find the right amount of groove if I'm using a swing like this. Start with the really over the top one, start turning it down. This around here could work, I think. Somewhere around the 30 to 40% range, I think sounds good. And it might vary again depending on what kind of song you're doing, what kind of genre you're doing, how off time you want it to feel. It's up to you. Trust your ear more than anything else. So using this timing control can be really, really helpful by just starting with a really over the top groove and then kind of turning it down. The other situation where people kind of mess up when it comes to grooves is, say I have a 16th note groove like this. Actually, other way around. Let me go back to our 8th note groove. Our 8th note. So I have an 8th note clip, and I try adding a 16th note groove to it. If I listen to this, it's not doing anything. Because what we're doing is we're moving, and we would be moving a note that's right here, and a note that's right here, and a note that's right here. So you cannot apply a 16th note groove to an 8th note clip. It doesn't work. So watch out for that, because I've seen people be like, I've added this groove to my clip and it's not doing anything. It's because your notes are too big for a higher resolution groove. So here is just straight 16th notes. And then if I add in a 16th note groove, has like a very different feel to it, right? We could start with a really heavy 16th note groove and use the same technique where we start to turn down the amount. All the way down to 0%, which is doing nothing. So say I like that. If I want to actually apply this to my clip, hit the commit button, and boom, we can see every other 16th note is a little bit late. So that's swing specifically, is every other note. There's also a bunch of other options in here for different kinds of beats or different kinds of grooves that can be really cool to like play around with. But yeah, it's a really, really cool feature that if you don't know how it works, is completely useless. But once you kind of know the basics of it, it's really, really valuable. I think I did a video on this. I think like check out the videos on the channel, and somewhere in there there's a video where I basically explain the same thing if you want to see me explain it again. So Brian was asking a little bit about how what about extracting grooves. So if you're in a situation where you have a drum beat like this. So this is a James Brown drum beat. It's got a filter on it for some reason. Funky down. All right, so this actually looks kind of quantized a little bit. Let's find one that's a little, this is fine, I guess. So one of the nice things about sampling like an old school breakbeat or something like that is that the timing of those drummers is all over the place. Let's get something like this. Like you can see the timing is off here. Like this is not on time. And that's part of why these drum beats are so cool. Those drummers, like a good drummer will be able to play things on time. A great drummer will be able to purposely not play things on time. So say you really like this drum beat, but you don't want to sample them either because you don't have the copyright to it and you want to release it in a song, or you just like the feel of that drum beat and you want to use that feeling on your own track. What you can do is you can right click on any audio clip. Doesn't need to be a drum beat, it can be a guitar or whatever, but most likely a drum beat. Right click on it and hit extract chain or extract grooves right here. It's going to analyze the transient information for timing, and you can do this to Midi as well if you want, but most likely you're going to do it to a audio clip. It's going to analyze the transient information for timing, the volume information for velocity, and it's going to create a groove file for you like this. So now I can take that groove file and apply it, in this case, to my hi-hats. And I didn't really check to see if this would really work in this situation, but I could take that and you can see it changes the timing of my hi-hats ever so slightly. You can see that guy's a little bit late, this guy's a little bit late, this guy's a little bit early. And that's great for humanizing, in this case, where we're just quantized 16th notes. So we can hear what that sounds like now. It'll probably be very subtle. Yeah, pretty subtle. You can't really tell that much, but that's a really powerful tool for being able to like, all right, I want to have that looser feel. You can just extract grooves out of literally anything you want. The more simple and more straightforward the material, the better, but you can do it to anything you want. Yeah, so Janef, you can save it. So these were the two grooves I was using earlier in my groove pool. There's the one I just extracted. If I like this one, you can hit the save button right here, save it as whatever you want, and then it automatically gets saved into the groove folder right here. So it just automatically gets saved into your groove folder and you can use it whenever you want. And one of the cool things about this is, this drum beat, I did not write. I do not own the copyright for this. So if I use this in a song, they could sue me for it if I don't get permission, right? You cannot copyright a groove. So you could write your own drum beat, take somebody else's groove, slap it on your drum beat, and it's still your drum beat because you didn't sample them. So if you find a really cool drum beat that has a really nice loose feel to it, and you're like, oh man, I want my track to have that same kind of loose feel to it, you can just extract it and then toss it on your drum beat. Another cool thing about these groove files is that technically these are .agr files, which is an Ableton groove file. However, you can load up a groove file into a MIDI clip or a MIDI track, and it treats it like a MIDI file. So that one that I just extracted, this guy right here, if I load this up, this is essentially each one of these notes is what it's quantizing to when you apply that groove. and then also has the velocity in here as well. So when I'm quantizing, this is what it's quantizing to instead of the grid. So you can just load this up and just like use this to play a different sound if you wanted. And that's true for all of these files, all of the groove files. So if you want to see what the funk modern 16 notes groove file, toss it in here. This is how it's quantizing, including the velocity. Yeah, the samples that Ableton gives you in the packs and things like that are all royalty free. Yeah, you don't need to worry about it. This sample is from a Monk Higgins song. So this one I do not own the rights to. Yeah, pretty much anytime you're downloading samples from like sample packs and stuff like that, they're all royalty free. But in the case like this James Brown beat, I do not own that James Brown beat. So yeah, so you can extract grooves from anything you want, put them in your groove folder, use them whenever you want. If you want to like see what they sound like, you can just click on it and it'll like play a little clicking for you. But if you want to actually see it, you can just load them up and then like boom, there it is. So yeah, grooves and groove pool, really, really cool feature that you can do a lot with for sure. Cool. So I think that covers groove stuff. There's more to it than that. You can go down that rabbit hole a bit farther, and there's more other cool stuff you can do about it. But I think covers grooves for the most part for right now. Yeah, Jeanette, for the kind of music you're making, Groove Pool will definitely be your friend. Absolutely. And then people had questions about polyrhythms or Polymeter. I forget which one. I think it was polyrhythms. Is that you, Jeanette? All right, cool. So are we wanting to talk about the difference between Polymeter and Polyrhythm? Because that's an interesting, the difference between them is kind of interesting. Or are we talking about examples of how to make polymeters and polyrhythm work? Okay. So if we're talking about polyrhythms and polymeter, I think that there's kind of two different ways to approach them, at least from me personally. I think there's ways to approach polyrhythms and polymeters as tools for just purely rhythmic functionality or tools for melodic functionality. And both are really useful. Let me explain the difference real quick because this will confuse people if we don't talk about it. So let me grab a different sample. Let's grab like a shaker. Cool. All right. Polyrhythms first. So a polyrhythm, and I also made a video about this fairly recently, is when you have one set amount of time, like 1 bar, for example, with 2 sets of evenly spaced events. So technically, if I were to do something like something like this, I have 1 set of time with 2 sets of evenly spaced events. In this case, I have 2 of these shakers and 4 of these hi-hats. This would be what's called a 2 against 4 polyrhythm. Super basic, but it is still a polyrhythm. Like that. Not too exciting. What's up, Alex? How you doing today? So 2 against 4 polyrhythm is not that interesting, but say I want to do something like a 3 against 4 polyrhythm. That means I would have 3 evenly spaced events in the same amount of time as 4 evenly spaced events. And the easy way to do this in this situation would be hit Command 3, which turns on your triplet grid. And now I have 3 evenly spaced events in the same amount of time as 4 evenly spaced events. Yeah, Adam Neely's video on polyrhythms is the best place to learn about polyrhythms, in my opinion. His one from Loop is fantastic. So the cool thing about doing polyrhythms is when you use a polyrhythm like this, it creates essentially a composite rhythm where you basically have 2 different rhythms that kind of become one rhythm. So here it goes dun 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 dun, right? Which is really cool, and it's a fantastic way to make your rhythms more interesting. If I wanted to do something a little bit more interesting than that, we could do like a 6 against 4 polyrhythm. Where now I have 6 shakers evenly spaced in the same amount of time as 4 hi-hats. So again, it creates this composite rhythm. That's super cool because it's kind of on the grid, but it's also kind of not on the grid. It's fantastic. Most music from around the world that is not Europe or America is heavily centered around polyrhythms. Like if you're not doing polyrhythms, what are you doing with your life? So I'm a big fan. I think if you are struggling with rhythms and beats and things like that, polyrhythms are a great place to get started. All the examples I did so far are pretty straightforward versions of polyrhythms. If I wanted to do something like a little more complicated, I could do like a 5 against 6 polyrhythm, which in this case, we do something like this. Let me do this and this and this, and then let me just shift click. Oh, I got it. It's always a pain to do this. There we go. This would be a 5 against 6 polyrhythm, which is going to sound a little crazy probably. But it can also work. So that would be a couple examples of polyrhythms. Polymeter is going to be something a little bit different. Polymeter essentially is when you have, for example, a 2-bar loop at the same time as a 3-bar loop. No, that's just 1 bar. We'll do something like this. 2-bar loop, the same as 3-bar loop. And this should be 2 bars. So polymeter essentially means that if I have a 2-bar loop and a 3-bar loop, every 6 bars, they will reset at the same time, right? So right here, they both kind of coincide and then the whole thing resets. So that's what polymeter means. So this could be chord progressions. I actually have done this with chord progressions before, and it's really cool. Where you could have like a 3-bar melody and a 4-bar chord progression. And that means that every 12 bars, they reset and line up with each other, right? So that's polymeter, when you essentially you have different length clips that happen simultaneously. And that can also be a really cool way to create, especially with chord progressions. A lot of times chord progressions get like a really repetitive, like same chords, same melodies, all at the exact same time. Try using polymeter, where they you have, like I said, either your normal 4-chord progression, and then you have a 3-bar melody that loops on top of it. And so that way, essentially, you get 12 bars where things are always changing and doing things differently. If that makes sense. So I don't often use Polymeter, probably not as much as I should, but I do think it's a really cool, interesting way to write music and just get a little bit more out of musical ideas. Is not just don't have things always be the same loop length. Is a really cool, really simple concept. I will also oftentimes do this with automation. You guys may or may not be aware of this, but if you go to your automation, if you hit this button, you can have a different length automation than you can with the actual clip. So here I've got a 1-bar clip and automation that is 3 quarter notes, which essentially creates polymetered automation, which is a really cool way to actually approach it. But yeah, in terms of like when you want to start using polyrhythms versus polymeters, I mean, I use polymeters all the time with drum beats. I'm sorry, polyrhythms with drum beats. Polyrhythmic melodies are also really cool. It's a really fantastic way to make your melodies really kind of stick out and feel like they're doing things interesting. So one of the ways I've been doing this, especially recently, is with the Euclidean sequencer Max for Live device, which can do polyrhythms really easy and polymeters both really easily. So if you turn on the sequencer mode on this bad boy, and let's give it a little volume envelope. Turn these guys on. Super easy. I didn't even do anything yet. So Euclidean sequencer are fantastic for just creating melodies that are polyrhythmic, or just literally just start writing in your Midi, where you have basically one set of notes. So let's just do, just to make my life easier, I'm gonna do some G minor. Where I have one set of notes that are gonna be, in this case, 16 notes. And then I'll have another set of notes that are going to be in triplets. And I have no idea if this is going to sound good or not. This might be a little bit too much, but we'll do something like this and see what happens. Take these guys up an octave. Actually, let's take these guys and make them slower. I don't know. There's like lots of options you could like play around with these to make it do cool things. To create just like interesting melodic elements by using polyrhythms. All right, sweet. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of polyrhythms and polymeter and the difference between the two of them. It's just, they're kind of strange concepts, but once you like play around with them a bit and kind of get used to them, they're both really useful tools for getting things that are a little bit more, not necessarily off the grid, but change in ways that are not as common in a lot of Western music, which can be really, really helpful for writing things that sound interesting without expending a lot of brain power, which I think is helpful. Sweet. So I definitely think we can explore some more about polyrhythms and polymeters in upcoming streams and things like that, because I would like to get more into it and actually get like do a bit more of a deep dive. We are running a little low on time for the stream. Kennedy, thanks for popping by. Appreciate you being here. I think I got to all the questions. Actually, maybe there's one more from a while ago. I think Alex was asking something. Apologize for the delay and get back to you. So Alex, you're looking for an app that can control MIDI CC. Are you just looking for like a iPad app or something like that that you can use for a MIDI controller? Is that what you're asking? Yeah, so if you're looking for an app that can do MIDI control stuff, the two that come to mind off the top of my head is either Touch OSC or Lemur. I am a big Lemur fan. I've been using it forever. It's fantastic. It can do literally everything. However, the issue with Lemur is that they've basically have stopped updating it, whereas Touch OSC basically does very similar things. And I'm not sure if they're updating or not, but I committed real hard to Lemur years ago, and so I'm resistant to changing anything off that. But Lemur, if you haven't tried it out, both Lemur and TouchOSC are basically a black screen, and you can drag and drop any number of buttons and knobs and faders and sliders and all that kind of stuff, and then you can set them to control any CC on any channel that you want. So they're both super flexible and should be able to handle any MIDI controlling kind of stuff you need it to do. But we can definitely talk about. It's gonna be hard for me to talk about apps on stream because I'm using my iPad for my second monitor for streaming stuff. But we can definitely talk about cool things you can do with apps and MIDI control stuff in the future. But yeah, Lemur is where it's at. I just wish they would update it and give it new features, which they haven't done in like 5 years. Cool. Well, I think that's going to be it for the stream today. I appreciate all you guys coming in, popping by, and asking all the fantastic questions. Had a really good time. I'm going to be back tomorrow for a Patreon-only stream. So Patreon people, you guys know who you are. I'll see you tomorrow. If you are interested in joining the Patreon, you can click on the link below. You can help support the channel. It's really helpful for me to keep the channel going and doing what I'm doing. Plus, you get all kinds of cool perks and benefits, including a workshop that I think is going to be coming up this weekend on a topic that I have yet to decide. I think I might do an in-depth Zoom workshop on like racks and cool weird stuff you can do with racks, and that might be what's going on this weekend, but I need to officially announce that probably tomorrow, and that's all Patreon stuff. So thanks to everybody who super chatted, donated to the channel tonight. That's really helpful. And then if you're not Patreon member, I'll see you on Wednesday for the song feedback stream. Looking forward to hearing what kind of tracks you guys have been working on. Yeah, firm handshakes to everybody in chat for being here. Cool. All right, I will see you guys later. Have a good evening.